So Kirk Taylor, co-founder and president of Land Betterment Corporation. Thank you so much for joining me on the Vertical Farming Podcast.
Yeah, Harry, appreciate you having us.
Yeah. Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, so we're just outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, where we're headquartered. And we met at the Indoor Ag Conference in Chicago
Yeah.
last summer. It was great to hear kind of your journey from the finance world into ag. I come from an accounting background. Most people want to, accountants can get into entrepreneurship or other types of things. My business partners came out of finance. The Land Betterment itself, right, put all of our skills together to try to solve some of the problems that, we can dive into during our conversation. But appreciate you. It was a great dialogue when we were together in Chicago.
Yeah.
And great.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us on.
Are you planning to make it to any other indoor conferences, indoor ag in March?
Yeah, we just had an email
Okay.
come through with our team to say, here's our top 3. Which ones can we get a speaking role? Which ones will, do reduce cost if we bring, some a container farm or a new appliance. So yeah, strategizing on that right now. How about yourself?
Yeah, I just got my ticket confirmed for indoor ag, and they've been a sponsor of the show. They've been such a great support of the show for many years, Suzanne and the team. So it was my first ever indoor farming conferences. After doing the
Great.
podcast for a couple of years, we were all in lockdown mode. So it was nice to get out and actually meet people. And it was refreshing to be on site and just have people say that the podcast was helpful during like COVID to help them get caught up on the world of vertical farming. And I've heard many stories of people who have driven to these conferences and they're like, oh, I was listening to your show on the way here. So,
That's great. There's been so much innovation, right?
yeah.
I think it's great to get people together in those scenarios, those situations where you can have tech-focused people, you can have operations-focused people, you can have finance-focused people, and really brainstorm on how to make like real solutions out of everyone's talent. So I think those conferences can be very, very valuable in that regard.
Were you born and raised in Indianapolis?
Just outside of Chicago.
Oh, Chicago.
So
Okay.
went to school at Indiana University for accounting and finance. Met my wife and we moved to Chicago for about 11 years. So we lived up there and then moved back down here to grow our family, but always been in the Midwest. I'm the son of a former corporate executive who turned entrepreneur. And so kind of grew up in that scenario. So I knew always, even when I had my, kind of like big 4 accounting job, knew that this would always kind of be much more enjoyable, taking ideas, putting it into practice, a solo journey, right? You need to have good partners as well as partnerships with external stakeholders. But yeah, it's been a good journey so far. I don't want to say how many years, because it used to be like, just a few years ago, but now it's kind of.
Yeah. Starts to add up. Did you always have a proclivity for numbers?
Yeah. I liked understanding why businesses succeed and why they fail. Ideas are awesome, right? But if the idea doesn't pencil out into a way to cover your costs, there's not going to be a viable option. And so, kind of, started taking accounting classes in high school, and it was all off and running from there. But I never found myself. I always looked at it as a ways to understand, right, how people succeed instead of just trying to tick and tie things. So I enjoy being in front of the clients, understanding, learning from them. Many clients were very successful, right, in their business. However, even inside that success, there was pockets for, the ability to get better, right? And so how do you find those potential failures on the front end so you don't have to go through them? It's something that I try to draw upon, from my experience in the public accounting world.
How much of that experience was colored by, your father's experience? You said he was in the corporate world, similar to myself.
Yeah.
I was in corporate for 20 plus years, and then I moved into entrepreneurship and not by choice, but had to figure it out on my own. And, had to figure out all the things they don't teach you, or like accounting I mean, you took a shine to it, and most people don't, right? They don't pay attention in their economics class, and they can get by, but as an entrepreneur, it is literally the lifeblood of knowing what's happening in your business.
That's right. And so for me, it was the opposite, right? Where I understood those types of things about the business, but I had to go back to business school to hone marketing or collaboration, some of those other skills that maybe I didn't focus on earlier in my career. But for my dad, I think that the unrelentless grind of success is what I learned the most, right? And so some days
Yeah.
those hours are long, or most days, but you're doing it for your family, you're doing it for your employees, and you're doing it for your customers. That's where you have to gain your desire, not for the quote unquote glory of owning your own business or having accolades or external success. You have to want to do it for your internal team, right? You have to come to work every day to make sure that your employees have that opportunity, your family has that opportunity. I think that's what probably I learned most about, watching him go from that traditional, salary type job to one in
Yeah.
which you're in
And
control.
then as you started to go through, you had a lot of different accounting roles in your career. When did you start getting the idea, or tell us a little bit about the origin story for Land Betterment?
Yeah, so Land Betterment itself was born coincidentally, or maybe by some serendipitous reason, but right before the world lockdown in COVID. And so we had previously invested in a lot of infrastructure and industrial opportunities in Kentucky, West Virginia, and Southern Indiana. Those communities, while they generated the building blocks for maybe the first 100 years of industrial revolution in the United States and the world, they were getting passed over, right? As the energy production in the US changed, that location of energy inputs changed too, right? Whether it be, wind or solar or natural gas or oil, those people who worked in those, fossil fuel industries couldn't move their families to
Yeah.
where those new jobs are, right? And so that left a big void. And in that type of community, in a transition community, when there's a void comes, drug use, poverty, food deserts, housing dilapidation, lack of investment. And we kept seeing time and time again, government and nonprofits fail to address the fundamental issues of that void. And the void to us was lack of purpose of a job, right? And so you can give somebody some money to pay the rent or pay their grocery bills, but you're not giving them a reason to make themselves
Yeah.
better or make their communities better. And so Land Betterment was like, okay, we have all this used land across this region, used to be for coal mining or whatever, and it's no longer being used for that. How do we repurpose it in a way that not only do we address maybe prior environmental issues, but work with the community to see what can be done proactively to provide real jobs for these community members, that then we don't have the drug problems or we don't have the other issues plaguing these communities. That's really the antithesis of it, right? So trying to bring both environmental impact and the social impact together in a way that's not charity, but it's a way to actually provide development opportunities for these
So,
community
Kirk, I'm
members.
curious how someone like you decides this is something that you want to take on, right? There's so many opportunities. You have continued with, the accounting
Oh
work
yeah,
and
one
like
hundred
all the
percent.
other things that you had your hands in, you know. And so, what's the driver for you personally?
Yeah, so I think that everybody has the ability to make something out of themselves and be proud of what they do. Not everybody realizes that. And I think that by providing direct roadmaps, direct opportunity for these community members, we can give them the steps that they can walk up on their own. That way they don't need like heater rails anymore. And I think that is very empowering because then you're not looking at areas as a problem, you're looking at areas as opportunity. Different mindset, right? Oh, that area is a big, issue. Well, or that area has a lot of opportunity. We just need to give them the steps that they could walk up. When I was in public accounting, I did work a lot with various government programs for affordable housing, commercial development in underserved areas, and I really got to see the effects of prideful development in those communities with a little bit of investment alongside a lot of human know-how and grit, can really make a big change, right? And so that's kind of how we looked at it. We were purposeful of how we built Land Betterment. We understood that we were not a nonprofit, right? We wanted to create a business that made sense financially, but we also wanted our investors and our partners to understand that we were making decisions not just for their return, right? Just not to maximize their return, but we are going to be making decisions to maximize the return of all of our stakeholders. And so when we did form Land Betterment, we did form as a Betterment Corporation here in Indiana, and then went through the rigorous work of being certified a B Corp as well, which is pretty hard to do, but it's also a lot of land management, land development companies are not going down that route, right? Because they are only trying to extract whatever value they could extract for their shareholders. But we really felt it was meaningful to engage the larger stakeholder group and really understand what their desired outcomes were. And that might not be to maximize every single penny, right, of return, but may actually allow you to get a longer term view of how that return is measured. And that's why we chose that route, which it was hard, but I think it benefits us in our stakeholder from a long run situation.
So we're definitely going to dive into, from the origin stories and the projects you're working on, and obviously get into what we're doing with Anew, but you're also the co-founder of a company called Reelement as well.
Yeah. So Reelement Technologies is totally different, kind of, but it's taking a new approach, technology that Purdue University incubated and, they patented it, and applying it to how do you reuse elements that have already been mined, specifically in the battery and the magnet space. Everybody reads stories about the terrible mining conditions in some of these like third world countries where all the minerals that go into your phone have to be mined in, right? And so how do you take what's already been mined and purify it in a way that can be used in new applications? But we were fortunate enough to license Purdue's technology and then commercialize it here in Indiana as well.
So it seems to be a consistent thread. And then even with like the holding company that you have is just real concern for and stewardship of
a
land,
lot of
right?
reuse. Yeah. So as part of the Reelement business, we were tasked with finding a large facility to grow into. Most people would go and look at cornfields or wheat fields or soybean fields, just rezone and put up a new building, because that's kind of the easy way. We actually purchased a former, nearly 100-year-old RCA television facility that had been abandoned for about 10, 12 years. The squatters were in there. You could have filmed a horror movie inside of it, but it was important for us to take a look at how do you reuse something that was the showcase of the community? How do you make it that again, right? And it was hard. It would have been a lot easier just to do it in a cornfield. But yeah, we've generally never done greenfield development. We feel that there's probably already enough, disturbed land out there that might as well make it go at reusing it.
You mentioned those abandoned warehouses. I'm a fan of electronic music, so I would go to Detroit for many years to the Electronic Music Festival there. I went like 9 years straight, but talk about a city that's seen some better times and some like areas. And I think they're on the upswing as well, but it just goes to show you what can be done with, people that are dedicated to really turning around, what is essentially a blight on the city.
Yeah, no, we appreciate that. And it comes down to asking the city or the community members, what do they want, right? Do you want this new, commercial or light manufacturing here back in your city, or do you want it way out in the outskirts? And more times than not, they want it in there because they're already paying for the infrastructure, right? It's already, the water's there, the sewer's there, the electricity's already there, the police already made, the roads are already maintained around it. Why not reuse that instead of building new ones?
So is that part of the work that you do with Royalty Management Holding to just look for opportunities like that and partner with companies that are in that space?
Yeah. Financing those type of projects are very difficult. And so we do look for kind of like-minded entrepreneurs who have a challenge that we've probably already solved once or twice before, and we can apply a little bit of capital, a little bit of know-how to try and make their vision come true.
What do you see as a common thread for folks that you partner with, the businesses that you partner with, in terms of where they're at in their stage of their progress, or, there's some traits in the actual entrepreneur
Yeah.
themselves?
Yeah. Generally, we look at companies who have experienced some commercial success or viability and that are struggling with how do you take it from an idea that's probably going to be receptive in the market to now formulate a very concise go-to-market strategy that needs the right type of capital as well as access to larger distribution. I think those are the things that we don't really look for. We're not necessarily like I didn't come out of the venture industry, right? We don't look at it necessarily. Are you only in a Series A or only in a Series C? Those things don't matter as much to us as where are you today? What do you need to achieve your goals? That's probably the biggest common thread, right? Sometimes if somebody is too locked in to say, no, we're only going to take money at Series B right now. We don't like, we just want to be constructive on how we solve problems. And I think that's our biggest sign that we're going to have a good relationship.
That makes sense. So switching back to Land Betterment, when you started it, did you have an idea of the types of projects already did you have those in mind of what you'd be working on? And how's that look now?
Yeah, so housing and food were big issues, right? We didn't necessarily know how we were going to solve those, but we knew that you could not focus on being a productive employee if you do not have a home you felt comfortable with and you didn't know where your next meal was going to come from. Additionally, if you were going to be a productive employee and you had a family at home and you didn't know where their meal was going to come from, and you knew your kids were not proud of their homes, they're not going to do as well in school, and then you're going to have, right? So all those things build upon each other, but it's not as simple as just going and building, a 200 unit apartment building in Eastern Kentucky, right? We talked with very great impact investors who all
Yeah.
wanted to invest in San Francisco, New York, Austin, and then maybe get to Kentucky or West Virginia, right? So that's
Yeah.
great. That models out from a risk-adjusted IRR, but that's not solving the problem, right? And so we had to find a type of housing stock that could actually work in these communities. And it seems odd, but the best was actually utilizing a upcycled shipping container and turning it into a house, into a home. Based upon your reaction, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. But, a lot of these
Yeah.
communities, a mobile home is actually the predominant mode of housing, right?
Yeah, makes
And
sense. Yeah.
the sticker price of a mobile home is relatively affordable, but the OpEx, the operating costs of that mobile home are generally pretty high. And the physical deterioration is really quick. And so it's really not an affordable housing option. But those people in these communities that have that is their only option, they get suckered in, right? And even worse, they get suckered into like a lease to own. And by the time they actually take ownership, the thing is like falling apart. And so you get into this
Yeah.
really bad cycle. And so we search all over for good contract manufacturers that can do nice container homes. We really didn't find any. Most were just focused on like really high end, like bespoke, like 8 container big homes. That's not what we're interested in. So we found
Yeah.
a group out of Alabama that was doing it already, and we ended up acquiring them to bring them in house so we can control the quality and the production. It's been really good. And so we have about 30 homes right now out in kind of the Kentucky, Alabama, West Virginia area. And the feedback has all been really good. They're built to a custom home quality, but not the cost, which really gives people some pride as to where they live. So that's been going really well. But then we had to take a step back, say, okay, well, that's a good method to solve the housing, but what about the food component, right?
Yeah.
And we had such good luck about utilizing the container for delivery of housing solutions that we were looking at and doing farm inside of a container, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we had very little luck doing it ourselves. We're not scientists, we're not agriculture background people, but we were fortunate enough to come across a guy, Ivan, on the Anew team, who really had solved what we had been unable to solve, right? The technology component.
Yeah.
And we feel, we can get into it, but we feel we solve some of the delivery challenges that they had encountered, right? And so if you think about the container-based farm, not only is it deployable, right? It is self-contained, it's sturdy, really solid from an environmental standpoint, right? We're not taking up large swaths of ground. Even greenhouses are generally energy intensive, right? But we're not, and which is a great way to hyper localize fresh produce, which is a challenge, right? So if you look at the entire, I mean, you know this much more than I do, but if you look at that supply chain, right, of agriculture, of fruits and vegetables, it's really terrible. If you
Oh
think
yeah.
about like, okay, so let's say you have a greenhouse in Mexico that happens to be carbon neutral. Maybe they have wind
Mm-hmm.
farm or they have power purchase agreements, and you live in Minnesota, and that cucumber has to go from Mexico to Minnesota. No one tracks that component of the cost, right? And
Of
so
course.
hyperlocal, I think, is both delivering better quality, more freshness. And generally, when you have fresher produce, you actually bring more nutrients, right, with
Yeah.
it. By compressing the supply chain, you don't need to have a lot of the pesticides and the additives.
Yeah.
Nothing needs to go in there because you're not transporting across the country or two countries. And you give higher level of consumer choice, community choice as to what they want to grow, right? They can decide what they want to grow, which I think all of those things are hugely valuable in the partnership between Anew and us, which you mentioned, really unlocks that both from just a straight community standpoint, but also an institutional standpoint.
How did so for the benefit of the listener and the viewer, you're referring to Scott Massey, the CEO of Anew, who's been on the
Yeah,
show a couple times. Really smart
very.
guy, and sometimes it's like we're having conversations, and I'm just like, I think he's just slightly over my head in terms of like what he's talking about, but I'm trying to keep pace. But he's just a genius in terms of how he thinks through
Yep,
problems, and such as these. How did you guys get connected?
through LinkedIn.
Really? Oh, that's great.
Yeah. We're like I said, we were trying to solve this problem ourselves. I saw him through Purdue. I
Yeah.
think I
Oh, yeah.
followed their page or something, and he had posted about some, breakthrough that they had and reached out. And probably been about 18 months that we've
Yeah.
been working with them. And to your point, yes, we have weekly calls, and every week, yes, his intelligence, but it's like you got to dumb it down to 3 levels here for me. But it's great being partners with super eager and
Yeah.
smart people.
Yeah.
It is. So we did about 6 months of engineering
Okay.
together to deliver a prototype to their facility. We did that deliver that last April.
Okay.
So in the market today, there are a few container-based farms, right? Farming solutions. And we like that because we know that there's a market for it, right? And so one of the things you asked about going into a new market, I don't necessarily want to be the inventor of something. I want
Yeah.
to make it better, make it actually make sense. So the container farms that are out there are generally 40-foot shipping container, which is your standard length,
Yeah.
and they are highly farmer intensive, right? Manual intensive. So both of those things are negatives in your viewpoint, Scott's and ours. One is 40 feet is too long for most local deployment, right?
Okay.
20-foot shipping container goes into a parking spot.
Mm,
That's easy, right?
yeah.
40 foot, now you're 2 parking spots, right? And
Yeah.
it's tough to get into some environments because their delivery
Yeah.
is difficult. And so that was one of the key differentiators between what the power of the news technology was able to unlock in a smaller, container. And then their technology as it relates to automation is a game changer, right? The challenge with any farming is external environment and then human error, right?
Yeah.
We solve the external environment by doing this out of a shipping container. Our quote unquote competition doesn't solve for the human error component, but the new team does, right? And so when you can deliver, high results without human interaction, well, actually, I guess you remove the human interaction to allow for higher results. Then you have replicatable success, which I think is important. Let's say you are an owner of 3 restaurants in let's say, I don't know, Lexington, Kentucky, or
Sure.
Cincinnati, Ohio, or Minneapolis, right? And you want to be able to have fresh produce for your 3 restaurants. You generally want to have consistency across your menu, and you need to make sure that container farmer is delivering consistent results. If it was a manual intensive process and the guy on 3rd shift, didn't wipe his boots off and then infested your entire thing with gnats,
Sure.
you don't have your thing for 3 months, right? Your
Yeah.
ingredient for 3 months. Now you're kind of screwed. And so that replicatable success is very important from a market pickup standpoint.
So what is the model for once these units are built? You mentioned restaurants partnering with them as well. So what are the different applications, how they're being used?
Yeah. So we look at, eventually there will be a government application, right? A government application will include military and first responder or disaster response, right? Those will be fully self-contained, frontline deployable systems. And those systems will be kind of seeded and potted with the same type of produce. So that way, okay, every frontline deployment is going to get this produce on this cycle, right? So you can do it. So that'll be one application. More on the commercial side, restaurant groups. And I'm going to say restaurant groups, large restaurant groups and small grocery chains who want to control their local produce. So if you go into some of the big box grocery stores today, there may be a sign of locally produced. There's nothing that quantifies what that means, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But if you can go into your local grocery store and walk into a container and pick off your own lettuce, then it's locally produced, right? Then you probably will walk in a container, will probably be inside,
Yeah.
but that it's been grown in that container and it was plucked out last night and you can pick it off the shelf. That's local, right? And the third kind of prong is on the educational front, right? And so we're working with 2 universities right now where we'll deliver, farming containers to them, the pure produce container, and they will not only use it in their commissary, right, in their cafeteria, but also use it for educational purposes. So we think that's like the perfect mix of stakeholder engagement. Not only are you feeding your students, you're teaching your students, perhaps you create a business around it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe pull in the business school and entrepreneurial school to sell into the local market. So those things are really exciting where you start to collaborate across different silos within a university or school.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting because I've seen some of the applications that you have on the site. It's leafy greens, herbs, fruiting, microgreens, and flowers. So are you seeing like different areas, businesses or looking for different applications?
Yeah, mostly you're sticking on the leafy green or
Okay.
peppers. Fruit's good. The spice a lot, like the ghost peppers that
Oh
we
yeah.
grew out of Scott grows. I mean, they will put you in your seat. They're so intense, right? Because they're so
Yeah.
fresh, which is great. And so if you think about it from a culinary application, now you can really let the chef or the owner of the restaurant really get their mind broad around ingredients,
Mm-hmm.
but you're not subject to outdoor climate. You can grow authentic, you know, Asian herbs or spices to have in your restaurant right there locally.
Yeah.
It's really the technology just starting.
Yeah.
And the iteration, the seed, I guess, technology is just starting as well. And once you start matching those 2 things up, we do think the growth, no pun intended, will
Yeah.
be exponential, right?
Yeah.
Because the machine learning behind the technology is so strong that it is always learning about what grows best under what circumstances.
Sure.
It is always collecting the data. When that tower, I don't know if you've seen
Yeah.
when that tower rotates,
Yeah.
it's collecting data real time, right? What
Yeah.
is growing that thing fastest? And then you can go back to the seed companies and say, okay, we have all this data. Let's start to modify these seeds in a way that's going to grow the best in this container.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see some pretty significant breakthroughs.
So where Land Betterment helps to facilitate those interactions, it's you kind of making the connections to these restaurant associations,
Yeah,
hospitality
both.
industries.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, obviously you talk with Scott, he's incredibly bright, really talentedly gifted in outreach too. But I think that just our experience in growing and scaling businesses helps identify markets that will be most receptive.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think, it's one of those things where we didn't have any past connection before reaching out. And it's been a really great collaboration together. We each have different perspectives, but still grounded in the same desired outcome, which I think is
Yeah.
great. He loves our mission. Obviously we love his too. It's been a really great partnership so far.
And are you staying in certain regional markets or are you going nationwide?
Yeah. So it's right now we're hyper focused on just areas that we can kind of
Yeah.
drive to and drive people to see the container.
Yeah.
It's kind of expensive to haul it all around the country.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have some bids out for West Coast and East Coast as well. And I think that you get 4 or 5 of these out there where people can come in and see, you're going to get a lot higher reception. So yeah, we're definitely looking for other regions. We make them in Alabama, so getting to the Southeast is not an issue, for us either.
If you make it to Minnesota, let me know. And
I know. I got to get you down here to Indiana.
Yeah, that could be an option as well.
Yeah.
I think Indoor AgTech is in Chicago this year again. So I think I'll probably be, yeah, maybe we should plan something. I'll maybe stay an extra day and
Okay.
get a visit in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. If you can, I'm not going to pay for parking to get the container up the shot Renault. I don't want that ticket
Yeah, I can imagine.
or pay the toll for it, It'd be like,
That must be fun to see on the road. What's been the biggest aha for you? Your introduction into this world of vertical farming and seeing what's possible. And, maybe before you knew something from the outside, but now working, day to day with Scott and the Anew team and just seeing literally and probably tasting as well what's coming from there. What's been the biggest aha for you, surprise for you?
Yeah, I think the early stage that we're in. And so our prototype that we've delivered, that we've been operating since April, has probably been improved maybe 3 times already. And the quickness and the efficiencies of those improvements is really eye-opening, right? And so like the first one, each tower had these huge like PLC boxes that had to generate each one independently. They took up so much space and they're so energy intensive and heat intensive, and all that's been engineered out already, right? And so not only are we delivering a better product to the end consumer, but it's lower cost and it's better efficiency.
Yeah.
So just taking something out of prototype, getting a feel for it and seeing innovation, how quickly has been eye-opening. I haven't been part of too many kind of tech forward businesses. And so just seeing how fast that can occur when you have, highly motivated, smart people has really been, it's been great to be part of, but it's been eye-opening.
Yeah, I think the more I enter this world and obviously even just reacquainting myself here in Minnesota with greenhouses and just the complete change in taste and improvement in terms of and how long they last in the fridge. When you look at that greenhouse grown and then vertical farm grown versus the stuff that comes over in a bag from Salinas is like, you don't think about it when you're growing up. And I grew up in New York City. So it's like you just go to the supermarket and you just eat whatever's there. And it's the more you start becoming acquainted with how far food needs to travel. One of my past guests recommended the book, The Secret Life of Groceries, which was a bit disturbing and eye-opening at the same time when you start to figure out, what we were kind of alluded to at the start of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And from Land Betterment standpoint too, one of the other things that set us apart was even as a private company, we went out and put together a fully independent board of directors, all coming from diverse backgrounds. 2 of our board members came out of large grocery chains and then went into entrepreneurship on their own. And both of them have been really helpful in thinking through how do you scale, a produce company, both from a safety standpoint, but also from a market standpoint. And then one of our other board members, she came out of E&Y from a sustainability consulting standpoint and really helped close the loop on some of those supply chain issues. It's not necessarily just trying to greenwash something, but there's real dollars and cents to understanding your supply chain and delivering something to the market that lowers the risk, right, of supply chain disruption, but also just lowers operating costs, right? As an accountant, I can understand I want to do something that costs less to do, right? And so not trying to pull upon trends of, ESG or sustainability or circular or something, just trying to actually make good business decisions, which generally addresses those issues too.
Yeah. So what do you see as the future for Pure Produce? Like, what is ideal for you? If we're having this conversation 12 months from now, what does success look like?
Yeah, I want to say we're going to have, half dozen fully growing containers out there. And I want to have you in and do an episode inside of one. I think would be awesome.
That'd be fun. Yeah.
Get you out of your cabin, into a farm.
Yeah.
And then I think that he'll solve so many issues, right? So we've had, Scott's been over to Western Africa. We have a lot of connectivity in some of those countries as well. We talk about the challenges that we were trying to address here in the United States in rural communities and urban communities, the exact same challenges that other countries have as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's highly replicatable. And so, we're just hoping to keep fulfilling this promise of solving these gaps in these communities.
So I also wanted to cover some of the other projects, at least touch on some of them that Land Betterment is working on, just for the benefit of folks that are just discovering you for the first time. I don't want to give, shine a little bit of light on what else you're working on.
Yeah, so we do a lot of land remediation work, but we do it again towards an eye towards what the community wants, right? So some examples is in Eastern Kentucky, there's a former coal loading aggregation facility that a large coal company kind of abandoned and never did the proper cleanup work. We did that cleanup work, and traditionally the state would require you to reforest it, which is fine, it's good. Trees are not a bad thing. But we asked the community what they wanted, and they said, we need housing. And it was like 16 acres of flat land. And the stakeholders said, well, if you put trees on there, then either we have to just cut them down again to build houses, or we lose that 16 acres of flat land. And so we worked with them and the state to redo the permitting and zoning, and that's where we have 12 homes as a rental community there now, fully rented. Gives people some idea of home ownership. We put them through like home ownership classes and financial literacy classes. I think those things are good. And I think always trying to say, how do you not only achieve what your desired goal is, but how do you try to achieve everyone's stakeholder, your community's goals? Generally, you work towards good outcomes. One other kind of tangential investment we've done is through Texas Tech University. We've sponsored and are a member of their Center for Sustainable Fertilizer Recycling. And so we're one of the commercial members working on circular ways to take nitrogen and fertilizer out of waterway streams and wastewater treatment facilities and reuse it, right? So one of the biggest issues in farming, as you probably know up there, is farm running, right? And how do you reuse the fertilizer that's been put into that farm and get it out of the waterways? So that's a really exciting one. And then they have one test unit deployed at the Lubbock Wastewater Treatment Center, and our container business built the container that technology went into because they needed a mobile solution. The standard trailer for that was quoted them for like 14 months delivery time. And we did it like in 2 months because they needed to get it out in the field to achieve their stated goal. So a lot of good stuff around those areas. And Yeah, I appreciate you asking about that.
What's a tough question you've had to ask yourself recently?
Well, I have 3 daughters, so we'll keep it to business. But it- sometimes it's about which opportunity needs the most time,
Hmm.
right? And it goes both ways. Sometimes you can focus too much time on the best opportunity, even though it might not need as much time. Or probably too often you focus too much energy on the worst opportunity because it does suck a lot of your time, right? And so same thing with, bad employees or bad what customers. You have to learn to reallocate your time into what's going to be most rewarding for the company and drive the best outcomes, right? And so we've gone through that transition. Happy to, allocate most of my time to Anew and some of these other really great partnerships and trying to, it's okay that not everything is achieves the greatest outcomes, but you have to reorient to make sure the entire pie, right, works out.
Well, I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the show, Kirk. I'm glad we got to connect and have this follow-up conversation. It's just so interesting to see, a good example of partnering with the right folks and what you look for in a partner, especially in vertical farming. People have certain specialties in one area, and then you come in with a company like Land Betterment, and I think your understanding of like figuring out what was not in your company's zone of genius, finding someone like Scott and New, and then realizing that yes, that's literally like his genius there, and then creating this merger of 1 + 1 = 3 now, and with the results that you're creating, finding these opportunities in these spaces that would otherwise go undeveloped or in regional areas that are not getting a lot of focus, like you mentioned, the bigger cities, right? And so I think what you've been doing, I don't know if you take the time to look back at your accomplishments over the years, but
Yeah, we definitely, yeah. No, yeah. Generally we look forward. Every once in a while, you kind of got to pinch
right.
yourself to see what the team's done. It's been pretty
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, just a reminder to you to look back at just, yeah, I don't know if you knew when you were taking those accounting classes in college that you would end up here. And, when you think about your DNA of your dad, just having that entrepreneurial streak as well, it seems like all the roads started to lead to where you are now. So I just like, am really glad for the work you're doing with Land Betterment. I think that this is really much needed resource, and I'm wishing you all success
Yeah, of course,
with your
Harry.
projects.
Appreciate that. And look forward to maybe seeing you in Chicago.
Yeah,
And yeah, I appreciate it's going through, obviously, preparing for this, going through some of your past interviews and discussions too. I appreciate your broad view on the industry, right? Because
yeah,
there are a lot of collaborations to be had. So
yeah.
appreciate your perspective too. Hopefully, this isn't our last time doing it in this format.
For sure. Thanks for your time
Yep.
again. And we'll connect folks to the website. It's landbetterment.com. We can learn about the pure produce containers
Yep.
and everything else you guys are working
Yep.
on as well.
All right. Thanks, Harry.
All right. Thanks.